Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Oil Painting, Learning from the Masters. This is episode 13. My name's Jason Meyer. Right behind me is Miss Izzy Meyer, gracing us with her presence tonight. And of course, in the next frame over is Miss Cindy Meyer. So happy that everybody could join us. You see Claudia and Janny and Karen's here. Sorry if I missed anybody. So tonight we're going to be packed full with info. I tried to make it very clear and explain it, but since we did lose that 1 week, and then this will be the last quote unquote week of lessons, next week we'll do a review of the whole course. It's a quick review, and then I'll take some of the paintings, some of your personal paintings that you've sent in, and we're going to apply these principles to those paintings and see what it does to the painting. Does it make it better? Does it make it worse? So I've already got a few of them in here that I've been working on, but if you have one you'd like to send in, go ahead and do that. The sooner the better, because I will need time to work on it. And then last Wednesday will be our last episode for this go around. So, um, any paperwork, Mama? Any house cleaning?
Nope, just next week's the last one.
Yeah, last one is next week. We'll talk about it. All right, so we're going to get started with the masters tonight. Because I did spend so much time on information and content, we didn't get to the music overlay this time, but I think your brain's going to be busy enough and there's enough visuals for you to get it. Again, I've interlaced this lesson through every episode tonight, and so you'll hear it a few times, and hopefully by the end, you won't be going, what? What's he talking about? All right, so let's jump in with the masters and see what you guys think. Last week, we began pulling insights from the book Composition by author Wesley Dow on composition. And he says that fine art is really about fine relations. And fine relations is about good spacing. He went on to say, so if you want to improve your art, you need to grow your appreciation of good spacing. He then said this is done by exercising on the small steps, and this will give you the ability to take larger steps, a natural path of growth. Last week, we looked at composing with masses. This week, I would like to look at the gesture of masses. So if we look at a vertical line, the direction of that, the gesture of that is vertical. So what would a vertical mass look like? Remember, painting is the language of mass, not of line. So a vertical mass will have longer sides and shorter tops and bottoms. Width. Then the horizontal line, likewise, will have a horizontal gesture, movement, action, or direction. So does a horizontal mass. Again, there's more. If we box this out, the top and the bottom in a horizontal mass is going to be longer than the two sides or the height of it. So what I'd like to talk about now is a method of stacking masses. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to alternate between vertical and horizontal masses. And we're going to do this to build a mass shape. Okay, so now I can go over part of the top vertically. I can hit the sides with vertical mass. Very quickly, you can have a very natural looking shape from working alternating your gesture from simply vertical to horizontal masses. Then if we came back with, say, what we'll call sky holes, and since this is still basically a vertical shape, if we wanted to, we could work horizontally with the sky holes. And we could use the sky holes to show some detail, to show the trunk of the tree. Right? So then with a little finesse and a little edge control, this is how we work in mass. Okay, so we do not start with the contour, right? We really are starting from the inside and working out, and then on stacking layers, we're cutting into and expanding the shape. Okay, so here's a quick review, stacking the masses. Okay, so again, vertical direction and horizontal direction, and we want to use this for good spacing. So let's take a look at a master painting and see how they did it. So there's the direction of the tree, we can see that. And then look horizontally now, the direction of the other trees and the sky holes. Then again vertically with the tree trunks. Okay, so that might have came at you a little fast, but what we're doing is we don't do square outlines, we paint in mass. And so we take a mass, we have a big brush, and what I'm suggesting is have a gesture. Be painting vertically or be painting horizontally. And then if you'll crisscross those, building up the masses, you'll have a natural looking organic shape. Okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the students' work, and I just picked one student from this week, and then I kind of used their work to jump off of and help us all exercise our recognition, just our recognition of spaces first. And that's the first step. After you learn to recognize the space, then we can talk about good spacing. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to use this one student's work as an example. And what I'd like to do is to give you a quick tip on making these look a little more natural. So if you'll remember, we want to go from big to small. Remember, the spacing gets smaller as we go back. So if we show that between the gaps in the trees, can you see how the gap between the first tree and the second tree is smaller than the gap between the second and third? We would like to reverse that. Okay, and that'll help you be a little more natural. Big to small in that spacing. So let's walk through these, and I'd like to talk with you about how we can look at these, particularly how we can look at these in recognition of spaces first. And once we can learn to recognize spaces, then we can start to talk about what's good spacing. Okay, so what we're going to look at is we're going to go through some of these, and let's look at the height or the negative space. In terms of height. Okay, what do you guys think? So maybe not perfect, but that's pretty close, isn't it? You see how those are getting to be the similar heights there? Okay, we want to avoid that. we want to avoid. One thing that I tend to say sometimes is we want to avoid being a fence builder, meaning doing them all exactly the same. What else do we see? What else do we see? Well, what about this and this? That's pretty close to the same too. Okay, what do we have on this next one? Well, we have this one, this one, all the way to the top and the bottom. We have this, and we have this. Now, it's probably not exact, but below and above are pretty close. And then all three of these are different. But one of the things that brings me to is, remember, we don't want small, medium, and large. We want small, medium, large. In other words, we want a lot of difference, not a little difference. Okay? And the only way you learn to see these is to start looking for them. Right? Like, this is an exercise that seems so simple. Let's just put some rectangles down, but with good spacing. Meaning that all of these spaces are different. Okay, when we came down to this size, how did it look? There, 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 there. Oh, we're getting pretty close here and here, aren't we? But the rest of them look pretty good. Okay, and I know we're looking up and down, but this space I think is about the same as this space. It's just about the same, not quite the same about that space. Do you see that? Three about the same, and then these two are pretty close. I don't know if they're the same, but they're pretty stinking close. Okay, good. Yep, nothing compares, nothing compares, nothing compares. Oh, nothing compares, but those are pretty close. I don't think they're exactly, but they're close. You see that? So we'd want something a little bit different. All right, and the last one here. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Oh, top and bottom of that's the same, isn't it? Yep, just about, huh? Right there. And, well, this is the same. That's the same box. Okay, so we want to look for asymmetry with the spacing. Okay, this was not to pick anybody. I really appreciated this exercise and all the work that they did that put into it, but I wanted to benefit everybody by taking a look. And when you look at yours, when you're doing these, when you're judging these, this is what you're going to start playing with. You're going to start playing with the spacing and try to make it asymmetrical. And if you want it to be representational, then let's make sure that the front step is bigger and then each following step is smaller, smaller, smaller. So the difference between here and here should be bigger than the difference between the bottom of this and the bottom of that. Okay? Again, if you're natural and if we're on flat land, right, there could be mountains or we could be looking uphill or something, but we want to keep it as simple as possible. Okay, good job on this. Good job, and I hope it's very clear on what we want to be looking for good spacing. One of the ways that we can enhance the good spacing is how we work. For instance, if we were to build this mass as a vertical mass and we worked across the vertical mass as we work down it, what happens as you work this way, you don't have these clean edges, right? There's boops and there's bumps. And especially as we work in layers, stacking, so this was vertical, now I could come over and in horizontal ways work through this. Right? In horizontal ways, we could work with the sky holes, depending on where we wanted to look at. And sometimes we can do it just above the trees too that are coming in. But if we work again across, make sure there's different shapes, not the same. But then we can start to build some interest. So this is going to be what? Well, it's going to go towards the middle, be a little lighter, a little grayer, slightly cooler. So this is almost a square, but we'll still go across it this way. Let's see, did that, I don't know if that changed enough. It's going to be hard to tell, I think, without some other background. Okay, let's work across. Okay, now we can work vertically. Then let's take across, straight across the trees like on the other side. Something like that. And then what if there were some trunks or stuff lifting through there? Okay, so alternating vertical masses with horizontal masses, and then making sure even the sky holes have either a vertical or a horizontal feel for them. All right, is the lesson coming into focus here? So we could start by planning these complex things out with very simple rectangles, and then solve our spacing problems simply by looking at those rectangles. And if we've solved the space problem into good spacing, which is fine relations, which is fine art, then we've gone a long way to finish our painting. Then all we have to do is execute those masses instead of a line contour as a mass. And as you do that mass, your shapes will be more interesting and things will look more natural. But we're not going to do the mass just once, are we? No, we're going to put down one layer vertically, then we'll come back and put another layer down the other way, and then on top of that, on top of that, on top of that. Now this doesn't always happen in one sitting, and that's what's sometimes challenging about oil paintings, is people are too anxious to see the finish. If we were baking a cake and after I broke the eggs into the flour, you said, yeah, but that's not the color I want the frosting. Well, you just don't understand how cakes are made. This isn't the point where we're making frosting or coloring the frosting. Okay, so I hope that made sense. So in the last demo I'm going to do tonight, it's about 15 minutes, but what I do is I walk you through this entire process. From the blank page, let's choose our horizon, choose our size and placement for good spacing. We'll create space. We'll put banks of trees in that space. We'll make sure each shape has a gesture, and then we'll stack them. Okay? Unfortunately, with the time that I had, I was only able to do 2 layers. But previously in the course, you saw as I worked week 1, week 2, week 3, and layered this idea up in oil paint, how it really got to build up to something before we knew it, and before we really put that much quote unquote effort in, right? It's not like we're trying to copy every contour or something. We're building masses and we're spacing them well. Okay, so let's see start to finish the demo. If you guys do have any questions, you can go ahead and get those typed in, or let Cindy know that you have a few questions for the end of this. And I will stick around and answer just a couple of questions when we're done. So let's take a look now at what happens when we put everything together. Do you guys remember how we start? Well, we want to choose a horizon line, right? And I suggested choose something either about 1/3 of the way from the top, or 1/3. If you divided the canvas into thirds longwise across, then on one of those third lines, we want to think about the horizon line, but we know it's not really a line, is it? It's a horizon mass because we're working in paint. I'm doing this very lightly because this isn't necessarily what we want the viewer to see. We're just trying to find good spacing. Okay, so the whole purpose of setting this up is first, we got to have the horizon line. After the horizon line or the horizon mass, we want to create space. Do you guys remember how we create space? We do that with 2 things, with linear and atmospheric perspective. Linear perspective simply says that if we take the space, this space here, this is near and this is far. So this first space needs to be bigger, the second space smaller, and then the horizon even smaller, right? You see how that is diminishing in size? Okay, so we want to indicate that on the canvas. Okay, so there's 3 steps in the sky, 3 steps into space. Okay, do you guys remember the formula? I shouldn't say formula, but whatever the distance is from here to here, when you're dividing your first mass, what do you want to do? Well, let's see. That's a little more than, let me guess, half is somewhere about there. Well, you know you'll always get it right if you take the space and then divide more than half and make that your first division. Okay, so more than half was about right here. Okay, now what are we going to do? Well, now we're going to look at this space and we want to go more than half. Okay, so more than half again. And then let's do that one more time. And where are we going to do it? Well, we're going to do it with this space, and we want to go more than half. These will be our biggest spaces right here, and they will continue to shrink to this point. In other words, this will get smaller here, again smaller here, and again smaller there. And that's how we set up space on the ground. And in the sky, if we started with this one, that's not as tall, and then that's shorter still. And that's how we create the space. Okay, but again, these are just placeholders. Placeholders. So now let's talk about the tree banks. And we want to make sure that we have good spacing for the tree banks. So if we started our first one right here, so maybe a third up and not quite a third over. So if that was our first bank of trees, again, we don't want this to be too obvious. Okay, so we have this step, and then if we step back to our next tree bank, and this time let's go a little bit over a third, and let's take that, so that's less of the first one, so right through there. So that will be our second tree bank. And then finally, we went from there to there, then we could go back to here, and this could be our final tree bank. Okay, so I want to clean that up just a little bit, and let's have a look at it. In essence, what we want to do is we want this part of the painting to quote unquote be invisible to the viewer, right? This is for our information. These are our scratch notes. So we want to put them in very lightly. But for the sake of clarity, I'm going to make these very obvious right now so that we can talk about them and judge them on the basis of good spacing. So when we take all the noise away, this is what we have left. Now, let's investigate our spacing. Okay, did everything get in there different? This and this looks a little close to me. What about to you guys? You guys see anything else? And yeah, this and this is a little close. So what I might do is just drop that down a little bit so that the difference between here and here is greater. Okay? Okay, so let's say that looks good. Again, we don't want it this obvious. This was just so that we could practice recognizing. What are we going to do about those two spaces there? What are we going to do about those two spaces? Again, what if we drop this first triangle or this first box down to there? So we'd end up with something like that. And that doesn't look too bad to me. Okay, so if that's our general size and placement, Then the next thing we want to do is to make sure each mass has a direction. Okay, so I'll leave the dark outlines in for right now. So just to remind you guys what we're doing here. But I want to mask this in. I don't want to put this in as a line drawing, right? I'd like to mask this in. One of the things we can do, along with linear perspective, the size is taller, and atmospheric perspective, as it's closer, it's a richer color, is we can work with bigger brushes as we're close, and get to smaller brushes as we go away. So we'll be lighter grayer on this one. Let's go to a smaller brush there as we go back, and lighter grayer again for atmospheric perspective. Okay, so these might be the first marks you want to see on the canvas as far as size and placement. But let's go ahead and get the ground and the sky in as well. Again, we can start with bigger strokes up forward. And smaller strokes as we go back. I'm going to skip the shadow for right this second, just to simplify things. So it's lighter grayer as we go back. And then this one's not going to have the height of the one before it. Let's see, I don't know if that's a big enough change. Let's see how that reads. All right. Lighter grayer and smaller. Then that would be the massing in of the ground. The horizon. Right, and if I wanted to, I could go ahead and start putting in some negative shapes. Okay, so the layer above is going to be a bit darker and richer, and it will also be larger. Now we stack. And as we stack, what are we going to do? We're going to change directions. So let's go back to our big tree. And we're going to work in the opposite direction of the first stack, of the first layer. And notice how I can, in each time, I can use the back and forth to make the negative shapes more and more interesting. Now it's onto the grass. The second layer of grass. Third layer of grass. and so on. We'll do the same thing in the sky. And like that sky feels a little cold to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to warm it up this time a little bit more. And then again, the opposite direction, the layer underneath, slightly warmer this time. Okay, and if we proceeded like this for a few layers, can you see how natural things would start feeling? Not very, even though they're based on rectangles, those rectangles are going to be completely hidden, and it will feel like natural space. In addition, on top of this, we could put the idea of focus. But unfortunately for this course, we're out of time here. So step by step, and I hope you notice that at each step, I didn't bother covering every square inch. And then with each additional layer, what you can do is you can skip around a little bit. You don't want white canvas showing through at the end. But the idea of stacking and changing directions of the mass to create a more interesting mass shape, which is in turn going to give you more interesting paintings. Who can do a mass shape now? Who knows what a mass shape is now that they didn't half an hour ago? Okay, I've said it before, but sometimes it takes a long time for people to completely understand. What it means when we say painting is the language of mass, not of line. We don't want to be drawing line. We want to be thinking in masses and how those masses meet, the size of those masses, the gestures of those masses. Mass is the language of the painter. If you want to be a better painter, learn the language of mass. Okay, so even though we've only had 2 weeks on composition here, I feel like, I hope I've given you the basis that you could even study on your own for a little while, just practicing these simple exercises. The book Composition by Arthur Wesley Dow is an excellent book for composition and practices. Also, I could recommend Edgar Payne's Composition of Outdoor Painting. Okay, everybody. What do we have here? We got a couple questions. Okay. Rows start from the bottom. Fifth horizon. It says rows start from bottom. 7 or 5th is the horizon. It depends. There's not one thing. What you don't want to do is really put the horizon right down the middle. If you see very, very quiet paintings, it almost feels spiritual. The spacing on those will be much more equal, not equal, but closer than a real dynamic painting. So actually the size difference in the spacing you make can either make it like an action painting or a meditative painting. But those things, everybody thinks those things are set in special details or special colors, or if I can learn. No, it's with good spacing. The action starts with the space, or the meditation starts with the space. Typically, this is the last thing people think about, but as a painter, it's the first thing you must do. So when I'm taking on students, what I try to get them to do is just to paint a ton. Paint, paint, paint. Because you're probably going to paint for 2 or 3 years before you can even see good spacing. Because in your mind, oh, that needs to look like that. It needs to be this wide. It's that long. It's this. And you're just thinking about replicating a photo rather than creating good asymmetrical spaces on the canvas. Guess what the painter thinks about? Guess what the master thinks about? The master thinks about good spacing on the canvas first. Then they'll nod towards the other things. Okay, so as far as where you should put the horizon, a rough suggestion is either 1/3 down from the top or 1/3 up from the bottom. So if you divided your canvas into thirds, those two lines that divide 3 spaces would be a pretty good place for your horizon. By the way, the first times you do this, it will feel wrong. There's no way the horizon could be there. That can't be right. Try it. And then try this spacing and you'll be surprised. It'll be a more dynamic space than you usually come up with. Okay, trying to apply it to a current painting. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, everybody, so next week we'll review the whole course very quickly. Won't be an in-depth review because remember I lost 8 terabytes of data, so a lot of that stuff's gone. But then we'll take your paintings and we'll work with it. So Claudia, if you would like to hear my 2 cents, go ahead and get that in, and then next Wednesday I'll see how, I can't promise I'll get to everybody's, but I am going to try to get to at least 3, 4, maybe 5. We'll see if we get any more of that. That's going to be a lot of work on my part. But thank you everybody for joining us. I hope you loved it. Please make sure to give us a thumbs up. If you really liked it, subscribe to it. And hey, if this was as good as an art class, consider a small donation for the art class. We really appreciate it. Okay, thank you everybody who has donated. Thank you for everybody who showed up, given us our time, and who's tried and done these exercises, and for all you guys who've been turning them in. For this week, I'm not assigning any exercise per se, but if you'd like to practice this, you could just try sketching a little tree. Vertical, then horizontal, then vertical. And after a little practice, you'll be amazed that you can actually draw very well with not a lot of effort in this method. All right, as always.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, guys, until next week. Thank you. Great seeing everybody. Bye, Cliff. Bye, Claudia. Bye, Katie. Peggy, all you guys I missed at front. Sachima showed up. Karen, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, guys, we'll see you next week for one last one on this series.